Picture the first Thanksgiving. You know what it looked like, right? A scene of idyllic harmony straight out of a storybook. Pilgrims in their solemn black clothes, buckle hats perched perfectly. Native Americans adorned in feathers, seated as grateful guests. A magnificent roasted turkey, pumpkin pies cooling on windowsills, cranberry sauce glistening. A harmonious celebration of friendship, gratitude, and culinary perfection. The Thanksgiving story you learned in elementary school, it's mostly fiction, a carefully curated narrative created by Victorian Americans in the 1800s. They desperately wanted a wholesome, unifying origin story for their young nation. The real first Thanksgiving was stranger, messier, and infinitely more complicated than the myth. It was a moment born of desperation, politics, and sheer survival, not a picture-perfect feast. What's up, history lovers and curious minds? Today we're diving headfirst into one of America's biggest historical myths. We'll uncover the truth behind the Thanksgiving narrative that generations learned in school, a narrative that bears almost no resemblance to what actually happened in 1621. Let's peel back the layers of myth and get into the fascinating, often uncomfortable reality. To truly understand what transpired, we need to rewind to November 1621 in the fledgling Plymouth colony, Massachusetts. The group we now call Pilgrims, though they didn't use that term themselves, preferring separatists or saints, had arrived almost a year earlier. They landed in December 1620, which is arguably the worst possible time to arrive in New England if you're utterly unprepared for winter. Their journey across the Atlantic had been brutal, and the New World offered little comfort. That first brutal winter was a catastrophe. Disease, starvation, and relentless exposure claimed lives almost daily. Of the 102 passengers who embarked on the Mayflower, a staggering 49 perished, leaving only 53 survivors to see the spring of 1621. But by the fall of 1621, through sheer grit and the invaluable assistance of local Native Americans, they had managed to grow some crops. They had food, they had survived the impossible. And in a moment of collective relief, someone decided, let's have a celebration. This event wasn't called Thanksgiving by them. They certainly didn't conceive of it as a national holiday. It was, in essence, a harvest festival, a common ancient English tradition of giving thanks for a successful crop. The Wampanoag people were not guests in the sense we imagine. They were the original inhabitants, having thrived in this land for thousands of years. Their sagamore, or leader, Massasoit Usamequin, had signed a crucial treaty with the Plymouth colonists earlier that year. This alliance wasn't born of immediate friendship. It was a shrewd political maneuver. Massasoit was navigating immense pressure from rival tribes, particularly the Narragansett, who were growing in power. The colonists, despite their dwindling numbers, possessed powerful European weaponry, muskets and cannons. An alliance with them offered Massasoit a strategic advantage, a way to bolster his own position in a volatile regional landscape. So, when the colonists held their harvest celebration, Massasoit and approximately 90 Wampanoag men showed up. This wasn't a casual invitation. It was a significant diplomatic presence. 90 men. For context, there were only about 50 colonists total at this point, including women and children. The Wampanoag outnumbered them almost 2 to 1. This wasn't the Pilgrims invited them as guests. This was more akin to the Wampanoag showed up with a large armed contingent to a political allies celebration. They were asserting their presence and their power. The power dynamic was vastly different from the cozy, equal footing we often imagine. The Wampanoag were not passive recipients of Pilgrim hospitality. They were active participants in a complex political landscape. Now let's talk about the food, because this is where the myth really deliciously falls apart. Prepare to have your culinary illusions shattered. Here's what you think they ate. Here's what they actually ate. Get ready for the split screen of historical truth. No turkey as the centerpiece. Well, maybe. One primary source mentions fowl, which might have included wild turkey, but it was far more likely to be duck or geese, which were abundant. Turkeys certainly weren't the star of the show. No pumpkin pie. This one stings, doesn't it? They didn't have butter, they didn't have wheat flour for crusts, and crucially, they had no ovens for baking. Pumpkin pie requires all of these things. No cranberry sauce. Again, no sugar to make it palatable. Cranberries grew wild in the region, but without copious amounts of sweetener, They are incredibly tart, almost inedible. No mashed potatoes. Potatoes are indigenous to South America. They hadn't made their way to New England yet. White potatoes wouldn't become common in North America for another century. No stuffing as we know it. No refined bread to make it from. Their stuffing would have been a much simpler affair, perhaps wild herbs and grains. So what did they eat? The menu was robust but rustic. Venison, deer meat, lots of it thanks to the Wampanoag. Wild fowl, ducks, geese, possibly some wild turkey. Fish and seafood cod, bass, clams, mussels, possibly even eels. Corn but not on the cob, ground into porridge or bread. Squash and pumpkin boiled or roasted, not in pie form. Nuts and berries wild, unsweetened. Maybe some stewed pumpkin or other vegetables. And yes, possibly eels. Historical accounts suggest eels were a common and valued food source in the region. Yeah, your ancestors might have eaten eels at the first Thanksgiving. Let that sink in. The Thanksgiving feast looked nothing like Norman Rockwell painted it. It was a hearty, practical, and culturally blended meal, but far from the idealized image. Now, let's utterly destroy some myths about the Pilgrims' appearance and identity. This is what you think Pilgrims looked like. Somber black clothes, tall buckle hats, and perpetually stern expressions. The reality is quite different. No buckle hats. That iconic style simply didn't exist in 1621. The buckle hat image is a later invention, a blend of 19th century Victorian imagination and later Puritan fashion. Not all black clothing. This is another pervasive Victorian myth. Black dye was incredibly expensive and difficult to maintain. Pilgrims wore practical clothing in a variety of colors: browns, greens, reds, earth tones, and even some blues. They didn't call themselves pilgrims. That term wasn't widely used until the 1800s, popularized by writers like William Bradford's descendants. They referred to themselves as separatists or simply the colonists. The buckle shoe myth. Also incorrect. Shoes of the era typically had laces or simple straps. Buckles on shoes became a fashion trend much later in the 17th century. Basically, everything you picture when you think pilgrim is a romanticized, anachronistic fabrication. They looked like regular 17th century English farmers and tradespeople in practical, durable clothing. Not the stern black-clad figures from greeting cards or school plays. Here's another crucial detail. They didn't do this again the next year. This wasn't an annual tradition that immediately took root. The 1621 harvest celebration was a singular event. The colonists did observe occasional days of Thanksgiving after that, but these were typically solemn religious fast days, not feasts. They were spontaneous, called in response to specific events like a drought ending or a military victory. A Thanksgiving in Puritan terms meant a day of prayer, fasting, and solemn reflection to thank God for specific blessings, often in times of hardship. It was the opposite of a party with abundant food. So the happy, abundant feast in 1621, it was a unique occurrence. Not repeated, not a tradition, just a thing that happened once. So how did we get from a thing that happened once in 1621 to a sacred annual national tradition? The answer lies in the ambitious minds of Victorian Americans. Meet Sarah Josepha Hale, a formidable magazine editor, prolific writer, and tireless advocate. This remarkable woman is largely responsible for creating the modern Thanksgiving holiday as we know it. From the 1820s through the 1860s, Hale waged a relentless 4-decade-long campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. She wrote countless editorials, published recipes, and lobbied politicians with unwavering conviction. She romanticized the Pilgrim story, transforming it into a heartwarming tale of unity. Hale desperately wanted a unifying national celebration. In a rapidly expanding and often divided America, she sought something that would bring citizens together and forge a shared, wholesome origin story. So she took the 1621 harvest celebration, stripped away all the complicated, uncomfortable parts, infused it with a heavy dose of Victorian sentimentality, and created a powerful national myth. The Pilgrims became heroic pioneers. The Native Americans became grateful, benevolent guests. The meal became a feast of friendship and harmony. Everyone was happy, pious, and perfectly aligned. It was a beautiful, comforting story. It just wasn't true. And then came Abraham Lincoln. The nation was in its darkest hour. The Civil War was at its height. The country was literally tearing itself apart, brother fighting brother. Lincoln, a master strategist, understood the profound need for national cohesion. Sarah Josepha Hale, ever persistent, wrote to him. She had been campaigning for a national Thanksgiving for 40 years. She made her compelling case for a unifying holiday. Lincoln, recognizing the immense psychological and political value, agreed. On October 3, 1863, in the midst of the bloodiest conflict in American history, Lincoln formally declared Thanksgiving a national holiday. He set it for the last Thursday of November, establishing it as an annual tradition. He was asking Americans to be thankful and unified while they were literally fighting a war against each other. It was a brilliant political move, cloaked in tradition and sentiment. He leveraged Hale's romanticized Pilgrim myth to forge a sense of national identity during the worst crisis in American history. And it worked. Thanksgiving became the enduring tradition we know today. But the version that became tradition was Hale's romanticized myth, not the complicated, often brutal reality of 1621. Here's the part that often makes people uncomfortable, but it's essential for a complete understanding. That harvest celebration in 1621, it was a brief, fleeting moment of uneasy alliance. Within just a few years, relations between the rapidly expanding colonists and the Native American tribes deteriorated significantly. Land disputes, cultural clashes, and broken agreements became the norm. By 1637, a mere 16 years after that first Thanksgiving, the colonists were embroiled in the brutal Pequot War, which included horrific massacres of Native American villages. The peaceful feast of 1621 did not lead to lasting friendship or harmony. It was a temporary political arrangement that tragically collapsed under the relentless pressure of colonial expansion and differing worldviews. This doesn't negate the fact that the 1621 event happened. It means it was far more complicated than the myth suggests, and what came after makes the friendship narrative impossible to sustain without ignoring immense suffering. Many modern Native Americans observe a national day of mourning on Thanksgiving. From their perspective, the holiday, as traditionally celebrated, commemorates the beginning of their dispossession, cultural destruction, and genocide. That too is an undeniable part of the real story. So what do we do with all this historical unpacking? Can you still enjoy Thanksgiving? Of course you can. Modern Thanksgiving has evolved into its own beautiful thing. A harvest celebration, a cherished family gathering, a day dedicated to gratitude. And that's perfectly fine. Traditions evolve, holidays change meaning, and cultural practices adapt over time. But it's profoundly worth knowing that the story you learned in elementary school, Pilgrims in buckle hats, sharing turkey and pumpkin pie with Native American friends in perfect harmony, is mostly a comforting but inaccurate fiction. The real history is far more interesting than the myth. It's also more uncomfortable, more nuanced, and demands a deeper understanding. But embracing this complexity gives us a fuller, more honest picture of how this country actually developed. Just maybe take a moment to acknowledge that the origin story isn't quite as simple as the greeting cards suggest. History is rarely simple. It's usually complicated, messy, and full of real people, making decisions based on survival, politics, and their own complex motivations, not grand moral narratives. The Pilgrims weren't one-dimensional heroes or villains. The Wampanoag weren't passive props in someone else's story. They were real people in a complicated situation, trying to survive and thrive in a rapidly changing world. And that's worth remembering, honoring and understanding far more than any myth. So here's your Thanksgiving homework. When someone brings up the Pilgrims at dinner, you can politely mention that they probably didn't wear buckle hats, definitely didn't eat pumpkin pie, and the whole thing was way more complicated than we learned in school. You'll either start an incredibly interesting educational conversation, or you might just get uninvited from future holidays. Either way, you'll be historically accurate, and that's a victory in itself. Happy Thanksgiving, history lovers. May your turkey be moist, your conversations be lively, and your historical knowledge be ever accurate. Thanks for watching History's Hot Takes. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about holidays, historical myths, and the messy reality behind the narratives we tell ourselves. New videos every week, proving that real history is always more interesting than the simplified version.